Hi, my name is Jon Hermanson, and I'm a candidate for the position of lecturer at the Haslam College of Business within the University of Tennessee, with emphasis in project management, strategy, and commercialization of technical products. The presentation today is going to do a high-level introduction to failure mode and event analysis, FMEA. This is a tool that is widely used across many industries and many functional areas as a platform for risk assessment. Risk assessment is critical in assessing the performance and safety of a product or a process. For our brief visit today, we will focus on product. However, many of the concepts and principles that I've taught in the past and have embedded in this presentation can also be used in terms of assessing process. The value of FMEA is maximized when there's quality and effective communication within the assessment process. This is why it's so important that interdisciplinary teams are formed to do these types of evaluations. It's not uncommon with FMEA that engineering, operations, marketing, accounting, quality, logistics all come together to participate in the assessment process. It's so important to capture different perspectives on the same type of activity of a product. As we look at assessing risk through FMEA, we're concerned with three broad categories of risk assessment. One is the presentation of detection. How easy is a particular risk component to detect? Second is probability. How likely is the event to occur? And thirdly, severity. If and when the event occurs, what are the consequences to that occurrence? So we're dealing with three broad categories: detection, probability, and severity. To help synergize the understanding, oftentimes each of these broad categories are scaled. In many common areas, including the one I've been involved with for many, many years, the scaling of low numbers indicates a low risk, and higher numbers indicate a higher risk. So, for example, in detection, if aggregately the group defines a detective component as a 1, that means it's relatively easy to detect. It may assign the value 5, and that would be something that is more difficult to detect. In like manner, probability can be assessed the same way, where 1 is a low probability and 5 is a high probability of occurrence. And lastly, severity, where 1 is a low risk of an adverse consequence and 5 is a high risk of an adverse consequence. Independently, these tend to give indicators of relative risk. It is a common practice, however, to take those values and multiply them together to form what is known as the probability risk number or the probability risk index. Many organizations have thresholds by which the PRN, the probability risk number, cannot cross. In my experience in working in medical products and medical devices, we had a ceiling of 2.5. In essence, no risk component PRN number could exceed 2.5. If it did exceed 2.5, then further work had to be done to mitigate the likelihood and probability of that adverse event taking place. So FMEA, although it's not quantitative per se, by scaling it, a general understanding and management approach to the risk can evolve. Now, generally speaking, FMEA is used initially to assess the functionality of a product, and this is all good in right order. But at the same time, it should be also realized that FMEA has more universal assessments across the life and the function of the product beyond the user use. For example, it is very important in logistics. packaging, packing the product the right way so it doesn't damage or is not suspect to the environmental conditions of transport, either to or from the various points of the supply channel, is absolutely critical. How it's labeled is absolutely critical. Where the label is located, is it easy to read? If it has a barcode or a QR code, is it scanned easily? And within that scanning, what type of information is contained? So FMEA is absolutely critical in logistics. It's extremely critical in marketing, not only for the elements of the sales presentation, but it helps identify the various pools of liability when it comes to warranting a product. At what point does the risk mitigate itself through the sales transaction? And it's absolutely important that FMEA identifies some of those critical components where the use is realized by the consumer, even though it may not be explicitly indicated in the instructions for use. Accounting is another benefit, or receives another benefit of FMEA, because it helps identify where the possibility and the probability of a manufacturing variance could occur. It may help further explain variances that are occurring in a production process. It can help identify scrap. It can help identify return goods coming back to the organization. So there's any number of benefits that the accounting and finance team realize from having a fundamental understanding of FMEA. Subscript to all this is, if you recall, we began with a brief discussion of putting together this interdisciplinary team. At the end of an FMEA process, one realizes that knowledge through the risk assessment permeates throughout the organization, and the overall intellectual quotient of an understanding of a product or its processing is better understood, which helps make a higher quality of decisions going through the entire life of the product. There are several beneficiaries that are derived from FMEA. Oftentimes, the elements that have been learned in FMEA become the framework for the quality system or the QMS system. They can become the framework for tooling, manufacturing, and training of employees as they learn how to produce and maintain the quality and service level of the product. It is also extremely important when we come time to auditing, to understanding where inputs and outputs may find themselves outside the normal frames of acceptability. Obviously, one could understand that these quality aspects that are derived from FMEA find themselves into relationships with the customer, the user, and the beneficiary of the product once it's in the marketplace. All of this puts together recognizes the value of FMEA when it comes to project management and the relative product management that goes with it. It is absolutely important to understand its role in the tactical strategies that an organization puts together in creating a product or a product concept for the benefit of the customer. And lastly, when it comes to technical products, where you have to recognize high functionality, speed, perhaps a shorter product life cycle or a more dynamic product life cycle, that FMEA helps realize the relative use and safety of the product from its inception to the end of life. And the end of life is not anything to be taken lightly, because that's where we have to consider, is it something that introduces itself into an environmental waste stream scenario, or is it sustainable? So from womb to tomb, FMEA is a valuable tool in assessing risk. I look forward to our next discussions. Thank you.